Hello, and welcome to Global Data Themes Instant Insights. At Global Data, we define a theme as something that keeps a CEO awake at night, as businesses that invest in important themes will succeed, and those that don't will fail. Hello, and welcome to Instant Insights. I'm Emma Taylor, and today I'll be talking to Senior Consultant Abhijeet from Global Data Beverages about the state of the Indian beverage market following Global Data's latest quarterly beverage report. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you for having me.
So, after your latest quarterly beverage report, what kind of conclusions have you come to? Over the past couple of years, the beverage market, like the rest of the consumer market, I'm sure has experienced inflation, price hikes. Those are some of the sort of key challenges. How are manufacturers fighting this?
So while in any other day, most of the manufacturers would see inflation as a revenue driver, but especially what happened in the last couple of years presents us with a very unique scenario, right? So when we talk about inflation or when we talk about price hikes, these terms are usually underlined with deeper challenges that most of the beverage companies or most of the retail companies face, right? For example, increasing labor costs or growing prices of commodities and raw materials. So we analyze a lot of categories, especially for Indian beverage market. One of them is dairy. Especially in the last couple of quarters in 2022, we saw constant price hikes being done by both government owned and private dairy manufacturers, right? And this is not only because of rising inflation. For example, what the dairy market saw was rising procurement costs and rising transportation costs, and then there was a spree of lumpy skin disease in South India that hampered the production of milk, forcing dairy manufacturers to increase their prices. Right. So there are a lot of negative impacts that have happened, but I think leading manufacturers and leading conglomerates have sort of devised a couple of strategies, mostly to put a cap on their cost, which we call cost containment strategies, as well as to maintain their prices but reduce their volumes, or sort of introduce a new package at a middle price point, which is called bridge packaging, which all the Coca-Colas and Pepsis of the industry have done. The second one is selling the beverage SKUs in bulk. So what they're essentially doing is, instead of selling them one SKU or one unit, they would force them to sell two or three or four, maybe five units. So that sort of, these kind of strategies have helped most of the beverage manufacturers maintain their margins. So it's a difficult time, especially in 2021, 2022, but we are seeing slow recovery through these strategies.
That's really interesting to see those sort of innovative ways that the companies are adapting, giving the consumer increased options. Is there any room for these companies not only just to sort of survive and adapt in this sort of post-pandemic ecosystem? Is there any room for these manufacturers to expand, to grow?
It's an interesting question, because if you see, most of the Indian consumer base is located in either tier 2, tier 3, or rural markets. So what we observed in the post-pandemic era, that we call the post-pandemic era, especially after 2021, is that the recovery in urban markets, especially in tier 1 markets, has been really quick, really aggressive. But then in rural markets or tier 2, tier 3 cities in India, the recovery has been comparatively sluggish, right? So I think leading conglomerates like the Reliances or the Daburs or the Cokes and Pepsis of the industry, for companies like that, they have started devising new plans to enter tier 2 and tier 3 markets, right? So how they are doing this? They are either acquiring these aggregator platforms applications, or they are creating their own aggregator mobile applications, right? For example, Nestle introduced an app called My Nestle, and that is not for consumers, that is for retailers and distributors to be able to purchase or to be able to contact directly with other distributors or directly with the manufacturers. So that is one part of how they are planning to expand across the country. So we spoke about traditional channels. Traditional channels are something which are discount driven, and they are still discount driven. But digital channels and this emergence of quick commerce in India has sort of opened new doors for convenience based purchasing. So people who stay at urban areas or tier one cities, they don't mind or they don't hesitate to spend maybe 20 bucks more for delivery or for convenience.
Mm,
So that market is speed driven, while the traditional brick and mortar market is still discount driven, right?
right.
So how these digital channels are helping, they are sort of helping most of the manufacturers or distributors to streamline the last mile delivery. Now it is being enabled by these quick commerce channels who are promising 10-minute delivery or 20-minute delivery. I might have to pay that application a bit extra, maybe 10% or 5%, but most of the urban population in tier one don't hesitate to do that, right?
Mm.
So that is also a new channel that has opened in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I guess people are always willing well, often willing to pay more for convenience and speed. I guess,
Yeah.
yeah, it makes sense that the leaders in this space are capitalizing on data, on these new digital channels. How are the sort of more emerging manufacturers and startups? How do they compare? Do they have similar growth strategies or?
Um, yeah, it's an interesting case in India where most of the beverage industry is being completely dominated by bigger players. So a couple of years ago, we saw a spree of uh, new startups and emerging companies coming into the picture with multiple rounds of valuations and fundings raised. But then in 2022, the economy became sluggish, and most of them struggled to preserve the valuation. So they turned to convertible notes, right? I think the biggest cost advantage that the bigger players like the Coca-Colas and Pepsi, and now Reliance has also entered the soft drinks industry in India. These players are having is so there is something called a sin tax and GST in India. So if the sugar content in any aerated beverages is more than 15 grams, the manufacturers have to pay an extra 12% tax. So along with the GST, which is 28%, the entire tax system becomes 40%, which most of the emerging and smaller players can't afford. It becomes a huge difficulty for the smaller players to sustain in this industry. That's why what we have seen is most of these smaller players have introduced health-based drinks, have introduced drinks with local flavors, or have introduced uh, aerated beverages, but call them an alternative to sparkling soft drinks, right? So they're essentially reducing the sugar content in their beverages and then selling it back. There are some companies also who got acquired. So what all the companies are eyeing for is omni-channel excellence, to be present, to make their brands and SKUs available across all channels. Many of the bigger brands have actually acquired these smaller brands, and that's how the market is functioning. So it's definitely a tough time. I won't say it's exactly a tough time, but then it's a little sluggish for the players who have just entered the market. But again, that doesn't mean that there's no room for growth.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I think that's all we've got time for, but thanks for listening. And from us in Thematic Intelligence, see you next time.